I just set it up.
Great.
There's Yoda. Hi, Yoda. Hi, Aaron.
The dog sweater. That's cute.
This is his favorite one. It's very soft. He has many, but this is the favorite.
He must be cold all the time, right? Because he's so
Always.
skinny.
Yes.
Hi, Shelly. Good to see you. It's been a
Good to
while.
see you as well. I know it has been a while, though your name comes up all the
We've got quite a few more people going to pop into the seminar, so we'll give them another minute or two before we kick it off. So we have quite a few of our pilot grant recipients joining, so that's fantastic. It's one of the goals of the network is to get the findings from our pilot grants disseminated widely to non-academic audiences. So Kathy, are you keeping an eye on the folks entering the room, or shall I do that?
Yes, no, I'm doing that.
Okay, terrific. We still have people joining. I think it's probably the end of the semester for most people. So we appreciate you taking your lunch break or post-lunch break to join us. Well, I'm going to go ahead and kick us off. I know we had about 27, 28 registrants, so people will be popping in as soon as they can. So I want to welcome you all to the NLCHDD workshop on disseminating your research to non-academic audiences. I'm Jennifer Karras-Montes. I'm one of the PIs of the NLCHDD, along with Jennifer Alshire, Sarah Brigard, and Bob Hummer. So we are thrilled that Dr. Shannon Monnat is joining us today. Shannon is the Learner Chair for Public Health Promotion, the Learner Center Director, co-director of the Policy, Place, and Population Health Lab, and an Associate Professor of Sociology at Syracuse. So Shannon wears a lot of hats. And as we all know, she's also a very prolific population health scholar and highly engaged in communicating her work and the work of others to non-academic audiences. Shannon seems to have like a regular feature in the New York Times and on CNN, regularly interacts with journalists. And she's also done a great service to the discipline by developing a research brief series, currently has over 4,000 subscribers, and it's been really instrumental in getting the research of folks, particularly at Syracuse, but elsewhere in the hands of journalists and policymakers. So she's basically the guru of research dissemination. So we're delighted that she's here today and is going to lead this seminar to share strategies on getting our research noticed by the people that we want to notice it. And then towards the latter of the presentation, she's going to have us practice some of those strategies during the seminar. So to be interactive, please feel free to interject with questions by raising your Zoom hand or putting comments in the chat box, and I'll keep an eye on those questions as they come in. So I'm going to turn it over to Shannon to take it away.
Thanks, Jennifer. And as many of you know, Jennifer is among the most engaged scholars in terms of disseminating research. So some examples of her work will come up during this presentation. And actually a couple of you who are here, you're going to see some of your stuff pop up too. So yes, I want this to be interactive, so feel free to jump in with questions or to share your own experiences. There are a couple of places throughout the presentation where I might specifically call out on people. I've learned a lot about this from others over time. I've taken quite a few webinars on this as they've popped up through Scholar Strategy Network and IAPHS. I happen to find this work to be rewarding and fun, and I hope some of you do as well, and that's why you're here. So this is the outline. I'm going to go through why we should communicate our research outside of academia. I'll provide some examples of various types of public-facing translation of research. I'm going to talk about some things to consider when you're doing this kind of research. Spend some time on some general tips for communication that kind of transcend the type. And then we're going to spend some time practicing identifying your single overarching communication objective, which is the main takeaway or the main purpose of what you're trying to disseminate to a public audience. So to start off, why do this kind of work? Well, I think it's a lot of fun. It's way more fun than writing academic papers or presenting academic talks, which can tend to be kind of dry. You can be much more free in your language and in your style. You can even be provocative. It provides you with the opportunity to meet different kinds of people that you might not meet in an academic presentation or with your academic colleagues. Another reason is that it might be your job. It might literally be your job. If you're at a publicly funded university, there's an expectation of sharing your research with the public. If you have federal grant funding for your research, there's an expectation that you'll share it with the public. Another reason is to break down barriers between academics and the public. It's an opportunity to show the public that we're people too. It's an opportunity to build trust and build relationships. Another reason is that your dean, your department chair, the director of your research center can use it, can show it off. Your parents can use it, your partner can show it off. A lot of deans really like this kind of stuff because they can share it with alumni or donors. Your mother might not share your academic article, but she might post your op-ed on Facebook. So that's a reason to do it. Another reason is that you can get timely findings out more quickly than what you can do with an academic journal. You know, it can take forever for academic articles to come out. And sometimes we're working on really time-pressing issues and we want people to know what's happening right now. It can also get your research into the hands of unexpected audiences and launch some unexpected opportunities. So for example, the very first brief that I ever wrote, I published through the Carsey School of Public Policy at University of New Hampshire. And someone at the United Nations Office on Drugs and Crime got a hold of that brief. And it led to me being invited to Vienna, Austria to work as part of this stakeholder group of experts on substance use in rural settings. So this free trip to Vienna because of a research brief that I wrote that was based on an academic journal article. So, you know, they didn't get a hold of the academic journal article, they got a hold of the brief, and it led to this trip and involvement in this UN group. Another example is, you know, shortly after the 2016 election, I wrote a research brief called Deaths of Despair in Support for Trump for the 2016 presidential election. And that led to all kinds of really interesting stuff. But one of the, I guess, most impactful things was that this director of research at a think tank got a hold of this brief somehow and called me up and said, we want to give you some research money. Will you do a project? Like that doesn't happen where people just call you up and offer you research money, but it did because of this brief. So I've gotten some unexpected opportunities from doing this kind of work. And I think the most important reason to do it is just impact, right? Like it might be your best shot at someone paying attention to and actually using the hard work that you're doing. Academic articles are behind a paywall. They're long, they're dense, they're difficult to get through. Briefs and op-eds get to the main point really quickly. So I'm going to go through some examples. The first type of public translation of research are briefs. So, you know, journalists, policymakers, practitioners, the general public, they don't always have access to academic research. They don't always have the expertise to parse out your research for policy and for practice. So the purpose of writing a brief is to disseminate research findings and articulate the implications of those findings to public audiences in accessible and in easily digestible formats. So these should be short. They can be as short as 1 page, but they certainly shouldn't be any longer than 5 pages. And if it's that long, it better have pictures. That's even pretty long for a non-academic audience. They should be punchy, flashy, simple. They should have one main takeaway point, really just one main takeaway. You shouldn't get bogged down in complexity or the nuance of your findings. There are a lot of potential audiences for this kind of dissemination. So local, state, and national policymakers, public health professionals and practitioners, certainly reporters. Other researchers find these to be useful because they can get a hold of your finding really quickly and then go to your academic article if they want more detail. These are great for students, for assigning in your classes for students to read, especially undergrad students. The great thing about briefs is they can be based on already published work or something that's forthcoming. Or it can be a standalone project. So, you know, we do these with the Learner Center in a couple of different ways where a faculty member or graduate student know that they have a paper that's forthcoming in a journal. They put together a brief. We link to that journal article in the brief. And then we try to time the release of the brief with the publication of the research paper. Then there are also situations where maybe somebody doesn't have an academic paper that's currently underway or that's coming out, but they've run some analysis, they have something compelling they want to show, and so they can publish a quick brief with that analysis without having it be a journal article. I mentioned you can use these as class readings, but you can also use them as an assignment for students. So in lieu of the traditional, final paper for a class, I've assigned issue briefs to undergraduates. They're more fun for me to read. And sometimes if they're really good, I can publish them as part of our research brief series. This semester in my graduate level health in place class, I assigned research briefs, a one-page version of them for graduate students to do, and actually I'm in the process of publishing some of those from those students from this semester. So that's pretty exciting. So there are lots of venues through which you can disseminate your briefs. And I'll give a couple of examples of these that have slightly different styles. One that you might be familiar with is The Conversation. So this is a nonprofit news organization. They publish informative articles that are written by academic experts and for the general public. They're edited by their team of journalists. Some of the articles are practical and advice-oriented, and others might provide answers to questions that the public is interested in. Many of them deal with current events and topics that are part of the public or the policy conversation. They tend to be around 1,000 words. Some include pictures. Some of the more academic style ones include figures like maps or bar charts that show results, but that's not super common. And the figures are certainly not technical. The example that I'm showing here is an article that was written by Jenny Brand and Sarah Bogard, where they apply their previous research on the effects of economic downturns on health to the COVID-19 pandemic. Sarah, if you wouldn't mind jumping in, this is one of those opportunities like to be interactive. Could you maybe just spend a few minutes talking about the process for this and what you had to go through?
Yeah, so I think that they had reached out to Jenny, who reached out to me and said, let's do it together because we had both written annual review pieces on related topics. And she and I have collaborated before and we hadn't had a chance in a while. So I was going to also point out that it can be a great chance to work with your colleagues on something that, if you don't want to get into a 2-year project, but you both have overlapping expertise. It was like a blast just to do something, more time manageable for both of us, given where we're at these days. So we worked with an editor there who was very good. I mean, they're very hands-on at The Conversation. I've had that experience before. And they helped us really, they kind of had a pitch for us. And then we sort of used some of the material we had already written and then evolved that towards a more conversational piece. And we did a lot of citing of empirical work and linking to great studies that we thought were important for people to have access to if they wanted to go there. But I was surprised at how hands-on the editing was. And I think they made a much better piece. So it's one of those that if you get the chance to do it, you get a lot of help. And they have a very good eye, and they're just really super smart people working there that will help you with the translational aspects of this stuff. And also, a lot of us work on depressing topics, and it's really like I'm the biggest buzzkill at any cocktail party, because usually at the end of the day, it's just sort of like this terrible thing is happening, and what are we going to do? And journalists are really awesome at helping you find ways to be productive and forward moving, even with stuff that can be not great news. So I think that's a great learning opportunity, as well as learning about how to pitch your work in different ways for different audiences and still have it be sort of rigorous and something that you want to stand behind. So I can highly recommend it. I hope that's helpful, Shannon.
Yes, very helpful. Thank you so much. And I want to let people know that many universities are partners of the conversation. And so you can actually check the bottom of their homepage to see if your university is a partner. And in that case, it's much easier to publish there because you'll have a built-in network. So you can work with your university communication office to connect. The Scholar Strategy Network publishes in a similar style, though they're a bit less journalistic. Their goal is to connect journalists and policymakers and civic leaders with researchers in the US with an aim to improving policy and strengthening democracy. It's pretty easy to become a member. You just can apply on their website and you fill out a little form. And once you become a member, they'll provide you with media support and training on how to maximize the impact of your research. There are also 30 local SSN chapters, and chapters, sort of take on their own projects, and they help build relationships between us and policymakers and reporters. They give members opportunities to build skills and have access to resources. These are kind of similar in length with the conversations. They're about 1,000 words. The example that I've shown here was written by Jennifer in 2018. Jennifer, if you want to just jump in, and if you remember this, 3 years ago, did you reach out to them? Did they reach out to you? How did that process work?
Yeah, I'm happy to share my thoughts on this. So I reached out to them, and this was the first time that I had ever done anything like this before, written anything like this before. And I did it because I had tried to write just a little research note on this topic I think I submitted it to American Journal of Public Health and a couple of other public health journals, and nobody would bite. The data were descriptive. It was a short piece. I really just I had an idea and I just wanted to get it out there. So I thought, well, I've heard of this place called SSN. Maybe they would be interested. So I sent it. I mean, they were really fantastic. They helped me with the editing. I was really happy. But the unexpected benefit was that this brief, you can't imagine the audience that these briefs go to. I had no idea. And what ended up happening was that this brief got in the hands of a group of lawyers at a think tank called Change Lab Solutions, who were studying preemption and were excited that there was somebody who cared about the health effects of preemption, and reached out to me. We've been working together ever since. So that was one unexpected benefit. The other benefit is as soon as you have a brief published, you can cite it. And so this brief helped me in the next publication on preemption that I could cite to this work that's already out there. Now, granted, it's not peer reviewed, but I thought it gave the subsequent work a little bit more credibility because I could point to this brief as a citation. So I thought it was a really valuable experience getting this in SSN.
Thanks for sharing that. Yeah, I mean, you never know whose hands these briefs are going to end up in, and the kind of trajectory where it will take you after that. And the point about being able to cite it, I think, is really important too. And I didn't mention that at the beginning, but that's another reason to do this is if you can't find a journal to publish something in right away, or it's sort of new and you just kind of want to get it out there, this is a quick way to do it. And then you can cite it and other people can cite it too. I'll also mention that SSN has a Health Equity Scholars Program that might be of interest to some of you. They just started this year. It's supported by the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation, and it's designed for emerging scholars who are studying social determinants of health. They receive ongoing professional development and public engagement. One of our colleagues at SU, Mark Garcia, is part of this program. He's not here, otherwise I'd ask him to talk about it, but you can check it out on their website and see if it's something that might be of interest to you. So in addition to these kind of formalized venues like the Conversation and the Scholar Strategy Network, some academic institutions also have their own brief series. The Carsey School of Public Policy at University of New Hampshire was the first brief series I published in, and they published briefs in a wide array of policy relevant issues. And based on my experience with them and seeing the reach of, how many times my briefs were getting downloaded, I kind of copied their model and started the Population Health Research Brief Series at the Lerner Center at SU. So we started this brief series in November of 2019. And since then, so it's just about 2 years, we've published 163 briefs. And at the very beginning, I had to kind of like recruit faculty and grad students to do these and kind of make the case for why it was good to do these. And now they're just sending them to me. Like I kind of get them constantly and I don't have to do recruiting anymore because people have seen the impact that they have. The nice thing about these briefs is that they show up in Google Scholar citations, and we assign tags to them on kind of the back end, the stuff I don't understand with the HTML. I don't know how it works, but they show up in Google searches. And so they end up getting cited in academic research. Our briefs have been accessed over 80,000 times, which I think is pretty remarkable in 2 years. There was a brief written by Scott Landis, who is here on this call, and his grad student, Dalton Stevens, that's been accessed almost 13,000 times. I don't know where that brief ended up, but somehow it was very popular and they got a lot of play on that. These briefs get a lot of media attention. I mean, we've had take up in the New York Times, CNN, Washington Post, National Geographic, NPR. There's also been a lot of policymaker interest. So one of our graduate students, Claire Pendergrass, published a brief this summer about aging services organizations in New York State and the problems they were having during COVID. And that brief got into the hand of a staffer for a New York State senator. And Claire got invited to do a congressional testimony in New York State Senate Subcommittee on Aging, which is pretty cool for a graduate student. To be able to do that kind of public outreach. And that was based on a brief. We also recently moved to a page where authors can see their downloads, they can see their social media metrics. And so it makes it kind of more exciting to see people access your briefs. We have a listserv now of about 8,000. So it's double, Jennifer. Yeah. And we also post on social media. Our communications office at SU sends some of these out to reporters, so that increases the reach as well. If you don't currently get our briefs, subscribe. I'd also say that these are not restricted to SU faculty and students. So if you want an outlet to publish your brief, send me a topic. I can send you a template. We can work through, what might work well. The only rule we have is that it has to be about population health. We have 3 types of briefs. We do data slices, research briefs, and issue briefs. So data slices are 1-pagers that have a figure and a short paragraph. They're really simple. So you identify the problem, you say why it's important, you describe the figure, and then you provide a concluding statement or a policy implication. So there are a couple of examples here. Scott Landis has done several of these. So this is an example of one of his data slices. The one on the right is a data slice that came out of the course I just taught this semester. I taught a course in health and place, and I assigned students these data slices as an assignment. And here's one of our graduate students, and we just published his brief this week. Research briefs are another style. These are about 2 to 4 pages. They're intended to report findings from new or recent research. They can be summaries of findings from either an already published paper or a soon to be published peer-reviewed paper, or they can be findings that haven't been published in an academic journal yet. I want you to notice something about these titles, both the data slice titles and what I'm showing you here. These titles are declarative statements, or they're questions. They're not typical academic titles. Okay, so like for example, Jennifer's is Conservative State Policies Damage US Life Expectancy. Like, what a cool title. It's a statement, it's provocative, it gets people's attention, right? And so it's a very different style than what you see with an academic journal. issue briefs are the third style that we publish through learners. So these are a little bit different because they're intended to express an author's expert thoughts. So they can be based on your own research or others' research about some pressing population health issue, but they're more like op-eds or advocacy briefs than the traditional research briefs. So these are also short, 2 to 4 pages. They might be some kind of an evidence-informed reflection about a new policy, a policy debate, a major population health issue, a new program. And what distinguishes them is that they're not really reporting new research, but they're kind of a compilation of existing studies that support some argument you want to make. These are great assignments for undergrads in lieu of a traditional academic paper, because they don't have to do like empirical research, but they can write kind of an advocacy piece or a think piece about a topic that's really interesting to them. So this lays out the structure for most research briefs, regardless of the publisher, regardless of the outlet. You want a title that's short and descriptive and catchy. You know, here's some examples here. They're all statements. So the top one is from a brief by Mark Garcia. You know, COVID-19 has had devastating economic impacts on older Black and Latinx adults. You generally provide key findings. So, you know, 3 to 5 main findings or implications, so that if someone only read those, they would get everything they need to know in like 3 to 5 bullet points. They don't have to go through the whole brief. The introduction should provide an opening hook that grabs the reader's attention. That's the main point of the brief. In journalism, it's referred to as the lead. And you LEDE, and you don't want to bury the lead, right? You've probably heard this before, don't bury the lead. So your first sentence should not be research shows, blah, 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 blah. No, you want something that like pulls the reader in right away. So for example, working age Americans are dying at an alarming rate. Okay, now I'm intrigued. Tell me more. After that, you sort of briefly want to explain why this is an important problem or issue. Why should your audience care? How does it affect them? And then the last sentence of the intro should tell the reader the purpose of the brief in one sentence. So for one of our briefs on minimum wage preemption, for example, we wrote, this brief summarizes the findings from our recent study that examined how many infant lives would have been saved if states had not prevented cities and counties from raising their minimum wage. So in one sentence, what the brief does in plain language. Then after the intro, you have your main text where you summarize the findings, focus on 1 or 2 main findings that coalesce into the big picture takeaway message. Use figures if they're applicable, if you have them. You can do these with qualitative research too, so you can show quotes in lieu of like figures, but you want to keep it simple. And then finally, to wrap it up, what should be done about the problem? What are the policy implications? Be concrete. Don't say something like policy should. Well, who? Like, who are the actors? Is it state government? Is it local government? Is it federal government? Briefs are not the place to advocate for future research. So your takeaway shouldn't be, we need more research on X. It should be, you want to advocate for a change to a policy or practice. And you can be really provocative here. It's okay that you didn't explicitly study a policy in your paper. You can still say what you think the implications of your findings are for a particular policy. Now notice what you don't see here. You don't see anything about theory. You don't see anything about a lit review. You don't see anything about data and methods. Okay, so you don't bog down your brief with theory or previous research. In our learner briefs, we have a little section at the end for data and methods. It's literally 1 paragraph, comes at the very end of the brief for people who are interested. It's short. And then we direct readers to the published journal article if they want more details about the data or methods. So those are briefs. Op-eds are another good strategy for reaching policymakers or other key stakeholders. You can use these to promote your new article or a book that might be part of a national conversation on some topic. They're also really good for reframing a narrative in the media. So I did an op-ed for US News and World Reports that I called "Our Problem is Bigger Than Opioids," because, you know, at the time, and actually still now, all anybody can talk about was opioids and overprescribing. And so I thought, all right, well, we need to have them talking about something more. There are generally 3 types of briefs. So there's the classic issue and remedy brief. These are traditional op-ed style briefs. They identify an issue, they offer a solution. So the US News and World Report one I have here is an example of that. Another type is a news analysis type op-ed, and here you're helping readers understand or think about a recent issue or recent event. Then there's the essay style, and these usually harness a personal narrative, a story, to make a larger point about society. And Jennifer's op-ed in HuffPost is a really good example of this, where she uses her own story about her life to make a case about the assault on the US education system and how it is going to be really bad for health. So some tips for this in terms of preparation and style and pitching. And this comes from a webinar that I took through the Scholar Strategy Network. So in terms of preparation, it's good to tie these to a very current event or a policy debate or to an anniversary. So, you know, it's been X number of years since the Affordable Care Act was passed. If you know something about healthcare policy, maybe you want to do an op-ed about that. You can always write the meat of the op-ed in advance to be ready when a news cycle hits. So if you're really passionate about something, right? Like Jennifer's really passionate about state policies and she's really passionate about preemption. So maybe she writes an op-ed and then something happens that makes that relevant at that time. You can just change a couple of things. Or, you know, Jennifer Ailshire really interested in like air pollution. Maybe you have an op-ed like ready to go and then something happens with a big air pollution news story and you can be ready to submit your op-ed when the news cycle hits. These are usually 750 to 1,000 words max. If the topic is related to a policymaker or to a specific organization, you want to name them in the op-ed so like web scrapers can pick it up and you'll get cited more. In terms of style, these are similar structures to research briefs. So no lit review, you want to avoid dense or dry writing, you want to vary your paragraph length, you want punchy language. Pretend that like you're writing an email to someone or you're having a conversation with a friend. You want to write in that kind of style too. Again, be provocative. If you're trying to target a particular outlet, like New York Times or Washington Post or The Atlantic, you want to mirror the tone of your op-ed to past pieces that you've seen in that outlet. It's really good to include a story about a person or a place. So your data show that you know what you're talking about, but backing up your data with a story really illustrates your point. So the Scholar Strategy Network had this nice line of your research makes it credible, your story makes it memorable. So my op-ed includes a story about places to help people remember the data by remembering the story about, you know, like this really bad stuff that's going down in McDowell County, West Virginia, where Walmart couldn't even make it there because the population loss was so great. In Jennifer Caris-Montez's op-ed that I showed in the past slide, she includes her personal story, makes it really memorable. Stacey Torres writes a lot of these types of op-eds. She's really, really good at it. If you want a model for how to write op-eds, go check out some of the links that she provides on her page. Hers are almost always personal. So she tells a larger story about society or some issue from her own personal experience, and they're very powerful in that way. In terms of pitching, you want to, pick the right target. Maybe you start local. You want to make sure that you're following submission guidelines, for example, on length. If you can find them online, they're not always easy to find. Like I said, you might want to get your feet wet by starting with a local newspaper. Maybe you can write about a local issue or a state issue that's affecting your region. You want to pitch early and often. So give the editor some lead time, probably about 2 weeks before you want to see your op-ed in print. But if you're responding to a specific event, you have to write the piece really quickly. Like if something happens today, you don't want to be submitting the op-ed about that a month from now. It's got to be really quick. Try to find a real life editor if possible, and not a generic email. You'll want to review recent op-eds to make sure that place hasn't already published something that's similar to what you're pitching. And you will, when you pitch to the editor, you'll need to be able to summarize your key message in one sentence. If you can't summarize the key point of this op-ed in a sentence, then it's too complex. Your story is too complex. And another way to think about this is could your key message be the title of your op-ed? That's a good way to think through whether it's simple enough or whether it's too complex. So when you pitch to an editor, your pitch should answer 3 questions. Why this topic? Why right now? And why me? Why am I the right one to write this? So in terms of why this topic and why right now, is there a news moment happening on this topic? Is it the anniversary of something? In terms of why are you the person who should write it, you have credibility from your institution by virtue of being a faculty member or a graduate student. But what else makes you credible? Did you recently publish a study about the topic? Your research makes you uniquely qualified to write about this. So that's what you tell the editor. Maybe you're writing about a type of place where you grew up. So you have personal or lived experience on this issue. Those things also give you credibility. So when you're pitching, you want to copy your submission into the body of the email. In addition to an attachment, you want to provide a 1 or 2 sentence biography about yourself, include your phone number so they can call you instead of email you if you want. Use the subject line pitch. Here you have to think about exclusivity. So you can only really pitch to one outlet at a time, and you want to give them about 3 days to respond. But if they haven't responded, don't be afraid to follow up. So you can email the editor with something like, if I don't hear back from you by X date, I'll be moving on. But you shouldn't send the same pitch to like 10 outlets at once. You want to make sure you give people time to reply. And then once your piece has been published, send it to policymakers. Their emails are all publicly available. You can find the emails of policy, your state senators, state congressional reps, federal senators. You can offer to follow up with them, share with your university networks, your university communication team, share with the professional organizations like IAPHS or ASA or whatever other organizations you're involved in, post on your social media. Thank the editor. So think about this as building a relationship. Maybe you want to do another op-ed with them later. So it's good to build that relationship. Another type of public facing communication is communication with reporters. So this might involve TV or radio or print reporters. And this is not for everyone. Okay, so like this makes some people very uncomfortable. And if this makes you uncomfortable, don't do it, right? Pick the right communication style that works for you. Like I can imagine some people breaking out in hives if they have to be on television. It can be very scary. So don't feel like this is the type of communication you have to do if you don't like it. University communications teams offer training in this kind of stuff. So if you think that this is a realm you want to get into, or if a reporter contacts you and says, we want you to be on radio or we want you to be on TV, then you can reach out to your university communications team and they'll go through tips with you, like what to wear, how to stand, how to talk, the style of what you should be saying. So they can be very helpful. I like to write a script and practice, especially if it's going to be live. Like that's super scary because you never know what they're going to ask. And so you want to have a couple of like bullet points or topics that you feel really comfortable talking about. The audience for these can be really large and really diverse. And so I would just say to be prepared for hate emails or hate phone calls. And if that's not something that you want to deal with, then maybe avoid this particular kind of public outreach. So there are a couple of examples here that you can see. Tyson Brown did a really cool interview with Politico about how civil rights improve health. There are lots of examples of this from pop health scholars. And then there are print reporters, and this is kind of a different ballgame than TV or radio. So I've had different types of interactions with reporters. One type is kind of like the reporter already has their story pretty much done, and they just want a specific quote. Like they're calling you to try to get you to say that one thing that they want someone to say, and they just want to be able to quote someone who says that one thing. That's pretty common. Another style is like the reporter actually really wants to know what you think about something. So a new study might have come out and they're, getting in touch with a bunch of different researchers who are experts in this area, and they want to know what you think about this study. Then the third type, which is pretty common actually, is that the reporter is starting a new project and they're gathering information to sort of figure out the direction that the project will take. So they don't actually have a story yet. They just kind of have a topic, and they want to find out from you what direction they should go, where they should go, whether their topic should be focused on one thing more than another. So they see you as kind of an expert who can help guide where their story goes. So in terms of tips here, right, keep it simple. You're going to notice this is a theme throughout. Keep it simple. Talk in short sentences. Prepare some sound bites that get across your message in a punchy way. Prepare notes. Have them in front of you during the interview. Keep in mind that reporters are often on a deadline, especially for the types 1 and 2. So you need to be prepared to respond quickly. If you're going to engage in this kind of work, it sometimes means responding to reporters at times that are inconvenient for you. But I like to be prepared, so I never take a cold call. In fact, if you call my office, I probably never answer unless I know who you are. I like to either set up a time to talk so I have time to prepare notes, or this is my favorite, I tell them I'm in meetings all day and that I can answer their questions in between my meetings if they send an email. And that gives me time to actually think through what I want to say and make sure it comes out the way that I want them to print it. So you can ask for questions in advance and you can tell them that you'll respond over email, and they're usually pretty conducive to this. Then I keep my notes and I just recycle them for reporters who ask about the same topic later. Rather than reinventing the work, I just kind of add to it over time. You should keep in mind that you don't need to answer everything they ask. Answer only what you feel comfortable answering. It's okay to say, that's outside my area of expertise, or my research didn't really address that specific topic. And you can refer them to your colleagues who might know the area a little bit better. And you shouldn't be afraid to guide the conversation. You don't have to answer the question they ask. Politicians don't. You ever watch politicians who are on news stations? They get asked a question and they answer a totally different question. They answer they guide the conversation. We can do that too. Keep in mind that everything is on the record, so don't say anything you don't want printed, because it might be that one thing that you said that you're oh crap, I shouldn't have said that. And that's the thing that they end up printing. You should also be prepared to not be quoted. And this is especially for type 3 that I have up here. So, there have been several instances where I've spent an hour with a reporter only to never see the story come out or to never see my name in the story. That happens. I like to keep a list of reporters who do that, so I don't waste a lot of time with them in the future. But you should also keep a list of reporters who you've worked with who have done a good job, so that you know to reach out to them in the future when you have research that you want to share with them. So keep a list of these reporters. So I just want to pause here and get any feedback or recommendations or experiences from others on the webinar who might have done some of this kind of work. Are there things I'm missing, or have you had any experiences that you think reflect some of these things I'm talking about? Jennifer, you don't have to raise your hand.
Oh, okay. Just trying to be polite.
Okay.
One thing that I found helpful is to ask reporters over the phone, is everything on the record? Or do I have the option of saying some things off the record? And I've always found them to be amenable to that. I've also found that sometimes I might answer a question in a way that I think, that wasn't really the smoothest answer. And I've said to them, can you just strike that and let me try it again? And every time they've said, yeah, sure, no problem. So I found that they kind of take a little bit of the pressure off in talking with reporters in this way. So I just wanted to mention it as some options, for kind of backing up and starting over in your responses.
That's a great suggestion. I've never even tried that, but I love that. Good advice. Jennifer Elsher?
Yeah, I was just thinking about this, one of these last points you hear, be prepared to not be quoted. I think what I've learned over the years is that you have to switch gears. And you can't really be your normal academic self in these kinds of interviews, whether it's print media or not, that we have to distill concepts to something simple but interesting. So I noticed that when I can come up with like cutesy kind of or snazzy statements, sort of like the examples you showed in the prior slides, they're much more like quotable, right? And that our kind of tendency towards, shall we say, long-winded explanations of complex topics that deserve a nuanced explanation is not really what media are looking for. And what they're looking for is something that we've not been taught, and it's definitely a learned skill, as you've been explaining throughout your presentation. But I feel like it's something that really can't be understated here, that you have to learn this other skill set, which is how to speak in a way that other people will find interesting. And one of the things I struggled with is we can't put all the nuance into this that we would normally want to. So we can't say things like, well, it's not that straightforward. Let me tell you all about the complicated, ins and outs of this. But you really need to kind of step out of yourself as an academic thinker and find ways to distill things down. I think we saw that, how scholars struggled with that during the pandemic, especially, and how difficult it is for the public to kind of onboard what we're saying if we can't sort of say it in a quick, digestible, easily understandable tidbit.
That's exactly right. Thank you so much for that. And so like, I always think, would my mother understand what I was saying right now? Like if I said this to my mom, would she get it? And that comes up throughout any of this, right? Like no matter what style, you're talking to a reporter, you're writing a brief, you're doing an op-ed, the audience who is not us needs to be able to understand it. Yeah, Jennifer.
So I just want to underscore what both you and Jennifer Alshire are saying. I mean, those catchy phrases are so important. I always go to interviews armed with several. And it's funny that I did a couple of interviews maybe 3 or 4 months ago, and that was exactly the headline of the story that was printed. And I was like, yes, I knew it. But another thing to do as you're preparing for the interview is prepare an answer to this question, because you'll almost always get it. The last question they're going to ask you is, what else do you want me to know? Or what else do you have to say? Or what should I have asked you that I didn't? So that's your chance to, again, could be your chance to say that catchy phrase, but like that's your punch. Like that's when you're in control of the interview. So always be prepared for that question.
Great recommendation. Scott?
Yeah, first and foremost, I want to give all credit to Shannon teaching me this process and helping me along the way over the past couple of years. It's been amazing. I think I also want to mention it's helped me with my academic writing, because I have a tendency to not get to the point when I'm writing a paper, to get so caught up in the methods that, my discussion section is methodological and no one cares. And I think doing these briefs has really taught me to really focus my message and to better address policy issues, albeit in a different way in the paper. But I think it's really helped me develop that skill. So I think it's another benefit to engaging in this process.
Thanks, Scott. Yeah, I mean, I have to say I've changed my academic writing style since I've been writing these briefs. I'm going to talk about writing style in a second, and language style in a couple of slides, but we don't need to be as complicated with our academic writing either. That could benefit from some simplification from my perspective. Jennifer?
Unmute. I just want to mention that Kathy Ehlers, Kathy, is that how I pronounce your last name? Has put some really great comments in the chat box. And earlier on, she had asked a question about Instagram. Do you have any thoughts on using Instagram for this kind of dissemination? Or Kathy, if you had a different question in mind about Instagram, if you want to unmute and join us.
Yeah, so I'm not going to be on video, but yeah, I'm from the University of Minnesota, by the way. Hi.
Hi, Kathy.
The Life Course Center sent out your link just a few hours ago. I thought, wow, this looks really good. Yeah, I lurk on Instagram. I kind of observe how different people communicate. There's this, I'm into foraging, and I follow this young woman who's a forager and foraging food chef. Anyway, I see the power and the immediacy and the personal connection that's formed through these repeated conversations that people have via Instagram. And I just wanted to bring that up as, you know, has anybody explored using that?
So the Learner Center uses it to disseminate our research briefs, and I'm not on it. Well, I guess I'm on Instagram, but I don't really use Instagram. I don't really know what I'm doing on Instagram. So I leave it to our communication people to handle that. But I do think it's a good venue, especially for younger audiences, and maybe even TikTok. Like, I don't know if there's a way to be performative with our research. Maybe we can get some of this out on TikTok someday. But yeah, I think the more venues, the better, right? Because you're reaching different audiences in different ways. So thanks for mentioning Instagram. Okay, so in terms of, you know, working with reporters, some topics are more, I guess, conducive to reporters reaching out to you than others, but you can also use strategies to get reporters to notice your research. And one of those is to use university press releases. So you might have a paper coming out. This is a good way to get your research in the hands of reporters. So every university has a communications office. Get to know those people. You can ask them to prepare a press release about a forthcoming publication. I've even drafted it for them before based on a style of other press releases that I've seen, because sometimes they're overworked, right? Like they're short-staffed too. So if you draft something that they can work from, that's really helpful to them. Press releases are really short. They generally include a quote from you, the author. You can also ask the journal's publisher for a press release if the paper is on a timely topic or it has a really compelling finding. So they won't do press releases about everything, but if you think that you have a really rock star paper, then you can ask them to do a press release. And you can also contact reporters directly to tell them about a forthcoming publication. So you can provide 2 or 3 bullet points with your main takeaways. Like I said before, keep a list of reporters with whom you've worked. Or who you follow on Twitter or Instagram, or who you know write about your topic. And sometimes they'll email you back and sometimes they won't. But it's really quick, you know, just to send out the link to your research, or you know it's coming out. Okay, so like it's you've gotten the proofs back and you know that your paper is going to be coming out in like 2 or 3 days. That's a good time to let them know it's coming and what it's about, and that you'll send the link as soon as it's available. Public presentations, so like sort of moving away from briefs and from op-eds and working with reporters, public presentations are another style of non-academic dissemination, and these are super fun, like way more fun than presenting an academic talk. These, you know, you can present to nonprofit organizations or community groups or libraries or churches or university alumni events. I did a pub talk a few years ago when I was a faculty member at Penn State, and like literally I went into a bar and they put my PowerPoint presentation up on the bar television, and people are drinking martinis and having their little bar snacks. And I'm talking about drug overdoses, which was really kind of weird, but fun, you know, like people are into the talk. And so it's really important for these to be very basic. Okay, these are not technical. You don't go into detail about your data and methods. If you're showing findings, you're showing them in time series charts or maps or bar charts. And it's really important here to tell stories about people or places that can kind of illustrate your findings. One of the things I didn't expect from these is getting questions that you can't answer. So I did a lot of these about, you know, drug overdoses and addiction. And, you know, I would have people come in whose kid was addicted to drugs and like, what do I do? Well, that's not what I do. Like, I don't know how to answer that question. So just having kind of canned responses for questions that you might anticipate public audiences will ask you that you don't know how to answer, or resources to direct them to so that you kind of off the hook. I learned to preface my talk by saying, you know, I'm not an addiction specialist. I'm not a treatment expert. So I'm not going to be able to tell you about that, but here's what I am going to be able to tell you about. if you're just getting started with this kind of work, you don't have to wait for an invitation, right? Like you can reach out to your university's alumni engagement office, for example, and you can offer to do a presentation based on your research to an alumni group. You can reach out to a library. They're always looking for speakers. And so don't feel like you have to wait for someone to invite you if you want to get started with this kind of stuff. Then there are a whole bunch of other types that I'm not going to spend a lot of time talking about, but other types that are important and help get your work out there: congressional briefings and testimonies, conversations with policymakers and with their staffers. Infographics are really fun. A lot of scholars have blogs or they do podcasts and certainly social media. So the Dear Pandemic group, which some of you might be familiar with, started doing a lot of dissemination because of COVID. So they have a Twitter, they have a Facebook page, they have a website where they provide these little tidbits of information about COVID to inform the public kind of as new things come up. So like what's new with Omicron. Jem Beam Dowd is one of the contributors to the Dear Pandemic group. And so they've got a lot going on to just inform the public about this current event, which is really cool. Okay, so no matter what type of method you're using, there are some things that I think you should consider that I've kind of thought about or learned over time. And I say that these are things to consider when doing this kind of work because it is work, okay? It can be very time consuming. It takes time to prep for interviews with reporters. It takes time to prepare research briefs or to develop presentations for public audiences. And so, one of the things to think through is, what is your aim? What's your purpose for doing this? Are you trying to enhance knowledge about a topic? Do you want to raise awareness? Are you trying to change hearts and minds? Do you want people to change their behavior? Are you trying to influence policy? Thinking through what you want to accomplish helps you determine what venue you want to use or what strategy you want to use. You also have to think about who your audience is. So is your audience reporters? Is it policymakers? Is it students? Because that will influence the style that you take. And then you have to think about whether you have the necessary time and the necessary support for this work. So does your department or your college or your university value this kind of work? On annual reports, it's always good to be able to demonstrate the impact that this work had. So did it lead to something else? Did it lead to a grant? Did it lead to a meeting with a policymaker? So it's about more than just the brief that you wrote. What happened after you wrote this brief? What came of it? How many people did it reach? Are there institutional resources you can leverage? So again, use your university's communications office. Is there an existing brief series like the Learner Brief series that you can use instead of trying to invent your own? Can you send it to Scholar Strategy Network instead of just publishing it on your own website? Think through what kind of communication style works best for you. Some people are really good at writing briefs, but they don't like talking with reporters. That's okay. You don't have to do everything. Some people really don't want to go on camera. That's okay too. Pick the outlet that's best for your style. Think about how much time you want to put into this work. Do you view this work as being critical to your job? If so, what will you spend less time doing to make up for it, right? There are only so many hours in the day. Think through how you can leverage the work you're already doing. So can you convert a peer-reviewed journal article to a brief without having to do something brand new? So try to, sort of double dip. Can you use a public presentation for a class lecture? You spend a lot of time developing a public presentation, just recycle it for class. This is key, especially for junior faculty and for graduate students. You still need to publish in academic journals. Okay, academic publishing remains the holy grail for tenure and promotion. So you can't just do public communication. And then in addition to that, effective public communication starts with good research. So it's based on doing good research at its kind of foundation. And in fact, reporters tend to be more interested in briefs that are based on peer-reviewed papers. So you want to always keep that as the foundation. In terms of general tips, so no matter what type of dissemination you're doing, some of these have come up in our discussions so far. The biggest tip is to keep it simple. No matter what you're doing, keep it simple. So what is your hook? What's the thing that's going to capture the audience's attention? Why should they care about this problem? You want to focus on the one big point or the one big takeaway. This is your single overarching communication objective, SOCO. I'm going to tell you how I got that in a couple minutes. We're going to get into that. But don't get bogged down in nuance. Like Jennifer Ailshire said, this isn't the time for saying, like, I found out that X affects Y, but only in situations where Z is present. And the relationship disappears when I add this other variable, but it comes back when I add this variable. Like, no, right? Just deliver the big takeaway. The nuance is in the peer-reviewed paper. They can get to it there if they want. You can be accurate without bogging down the message with all of those details. Don't bury the lead. That's the most important aspect of the story. That's what you want people to know. And so don't bury that by talking or by writing about theory or lit review or methods. The writing and the speaking style is also critical. So no academic jargon. Write and speak to an 8th grade audience. That's sort of the average reading level of the public is an 8th grade audience. So use short sentences. For briefs and op-eds, you want titles that are declarative statements or questions like I showed earlier. So I just want you to take a look at the difference between how we described one of our studies in an academic journal versus a public brief. Okay, so the academic text is on the left, the public brief is on the right. So in our academic paper, we wrote, this study investigates how the recent emergence of state preemption laws that remove local authority to raise the minimum wage has affected infant mortality rates. Using county and state level data spanning 2001 through 2008, the study models infant mortality rates as a function of minimum wage levels, controlling for confounders. The estimated model, combined with information on the timing, location, and level of preempted minimum wages, is then used to estimate the number of infant deaths that occurred in 2018 that could be attributed to state preemption of local minimum wage increases. Now compare that to what we wrote in our brief, which is this brief summarizes the findings from our recent study that examined how many infant lives would have been saved if states had not prevented cities and counties from raising their minimum wage. Way shorter, way simpler, and it still delivers the intent of the research, right? So this is a way to cut it down and make it more palatable for a public audience or in a policy audience. Academics have traditionally been trained to write in an opaque style, and we've been trained to do that to be taken seriously by gatekeepers, right? Like academic journal editors or our professors. But this is not the way we should write for non-academic audiences. I don't even think we should write this way for academic audiences, actually. Use simple vocabulary even when it seems less precise. For example, instead of saying analogous, just use similar. Keep the sentences short. Limit adjectives and adverbs. Don't use 4 words when 2 will do. I say this all the time when I'm reading papers. For example, instead of saying we conducted an investigation of, we can just say we investigated. How much shorter that is. Not everybody agrees with this one, but I say eliminate the phrase the extent to which from your writing. The extent to which is simply whether or how. 1 word instead of 4. And then, I keep saying no scientific or academic jargon. And so here are some examples of what I think are unnecessarily complicated or elitist words. These are words that should never show up in public communication. And actually, we could eliminate several of these from our academic writing to make that clearer as well. So keep it simple. Jennifer.
So I just want to point you to something that Jennifer Ailshire put in the chat. We've got a new word to add to your list of things not to say, and it's heterogeneity.
Heterogeneity. Yes, love it.
Jennifer, do you want to talk to us about that experience?
By the way, I heard a joke once on a podcast. I'm not going to cop to what it is because everyone will know how much of a nerd I am, but someone joked about how they had spent a lot of time and money on their GRE and they were going to use those words. And this is like a list of GRE words. But yeah, I had said that there was a lot of heterogeneity in the aging experience. It was an interview about how, Dianne Feinstein was running for Senate again, and she was considered to be quite old by some people at the time. And Jeffy, she was really kind, but very kind of stern in her demeanor. She just stopped the tape very calmly and said, I need you to find another word. This is public radio. But it was a good learning experience for me. I think every interaction I've had doing media has been such a learning experience. But I totally agree with what Shannon is saying here, though. I think simplifying our language could do wonders to make the work we do have a greater impact. We almost kind of limit ourselves by, using a lot of academic jargon.
Yeah, for sure. That's a great example. Thank you for sharing that. And then the final group of general tips for disseminating has to do with engaging and entertaining. Okay, so if you're comfortable with it, get personal, right? Like Jennifer Montes did this in her HuffPost piece, and not everybody is comfortable with that kind of thing, but I thought that was a really powerful piece. This also applies to public presentations or discussions with reporters. You know, like I tell reporters, I'm from a rural town in upstate New York where like everybody voted for Trump. And it, it makes me a person, and then they know who they're talking to, and they might, change the way that they're asking questions, or even, use that personal experience. I do the same thing with policymakers, like I tell them where I'm from, so that they know that I have some experience with this population who I'm talking about. Providing examples or stories about people, stories about places is really impactful. You can use images and graphics, but with care, right? So just like with your text, graphics should be simple. Maps, bar charts, and time series charts work really well. Try not to put too much information into one graphic, and be really thoughtful about your color selections too. For our research briefs, I have the authors convert their technical findings that might be in a table to a simple graphic that shows instead percentages or counts. So here's an example, again, from a paper that I talked about before, of converting a complicated technical table to a simpler figure that tells the same story. So our table used terms like counterfactual and IMR, which is the infant mortality rate. The figure just shows different levels of minimum wages and the number of infant lives saved. Same information, just in a totally different format. Here's another example from a paper and a brief written by Andrew London. So the table shows a lot of numbers with various symbols. There's terms like odds ratios and confidence intervals and p-values in here for major depressive episodes. And then the bar chart just shows the probabilities for the same outcome. Much easier for a policymaker or reporter or Uncle Bob to digest. So underlying all of this work, especially the research briefs and the op-eds and the public presentations, is to be clear about your single overarching communication objective. I got this from Malia Jones. Several years ago, she came to a group that I'm in, a rural demographer research group, to talk to us about impact. And she went through this worksheet with us on communicating your single overarching, communication objective. So we're going to work through an example and then have you give it a try. So SOCO, this is the outcome that you want to see as a result of communicating your research. It's not your thesis. It's not your hypothesis. It's not the scientific conclusion. So you need to be able to articulate what is the one important thing that you want your audience to know? What is the one important thing you want them to get out of this message that you're sharing? So the steps for this is like, who's your audience? Identify your audience. Are you talking with reporters? Are you trying to communicate with policymakers? Are you trying to communicate with students? Identify your main issue or your main problem, and be clear about why your audience should care about this. How does it affect their lives? And then what is the change that you want to see from this communication? Do you want your audience to understand something better? Do you want them to care more? Do you want to prevent something from happening? Do you want to change the way resources are allocated? Do you want to change people's behavior? Do you want to change policy? So be clear about what you want to come out of it, because by deciding the change you want, that helps you pick like your one overarching takeaway message. So here's an example of a SOCO I worked through for a brief I ended up publishing a couple of years ago for Carsey. So my issue or concern was, at the time, a lot of reporters and policymakers were using the line, addiction doesn't discriminate. We still hear this actually. But I knew from my research that drug overdose rates were higher in places with more economic and family distress. So that was my issue. That was my problem. My target audience, this is the group that I wanted to pay attention to this, were policymakers, public health professionals, and reporters. Why should they care? Well, people are dying from drug overdoses at historic rates. The deaths are preventable, but our existing policies aren't working because they don't address underlying causes. So understanding where rates of drug overdoses are higher can help us identify those underlying causes and identify policy strategies that could bring deaths down. What is the change that I wanted to see? Well, I wanted policymakers to refocus their efforts on upstream interventions that would address economic and social disadvantage, the disadvantages that make some groups more vulnerable to addiction and overdose. So you can see here the one big picture message. My one big picture message: our drug overdose rates are highest in places with the most economic and family distress. And that actually ended up being the title of my brief. Okay, so nobody has to guess what the brief is about. That's what it's about. Okay, now what I want you to do is try this. So think about your own research and just take a couple of minutes and try to fill in these boxes. And then hopefully we'll get some brave volunteers to share what they wrote. So what's your issue? Who's your target audience? Why should they care? And what change do you want to see them make? Okay, does anybody want to share? I know you all have very interesting and important research topics, so everybody here has something that they can say. I almost did one for Jennifer Harris Montez's research, and then I was like, no, she can do it. I almost did one about your state policy polarization stuff. Bob?
Sure, I'd be happy to, because just as we were getting on the call, I mentioned to Shannon and Jennifer that I have a PR Population Reference Bureau bulletin coming out any day now on a project that's just finishing up. So, and it's a lot like Shannon, so I kind of borrowed from yours, Shannon. So anyway, the issue problem is that US death rates during childhood and adolescence are the highest of any high-income country in the world. The target audience would be policymakers, students, and reporters. Why should these audiences care? Too many kids are dying far too early in the US. These deaths are preventable. Existing policies aren't working. And like you, it's the change you want to see is refocusing policy efforts. And more specifically, it's on things like, you know, there's 5 things that we focus on. It's low income, racism, gender, guns. I forget the 5th one. But.
That's great. I mean, that's super clear, super simple, right? Like you have this statement at the very beginning about how children are dying at rates that we don't see in other countries, and like this is terrible. This is preventable. We can do better. I love it. So you grab people's attention and you keep it clear and simple. It's great. I can't wait to read the bulletin.
Thank you. Yeah. They may delay it till early January, depending on, I don't know, when the readership will be highest, but it's coming soon. It's done.
That makes sense. Who else wants to share? Go ahead,
I
Jennifer.
share, but mine will be very similar to yours and Bob. So I'm
That's okay.
hoping somebody else who studies something other than mortality will or at least studying mortality in a different way than we do will chime in.
I'm happy to chime in with one.
Great.
So this network has really tremendous membership, and some of our network members work with the PI team on an issue for innovations in aging, which is one of the Gerontological Society of America's journals that focuses more on policy relevant research. And during the revision process, the people were pushing me to essentially do something like this. So my kind of issue or problem was that EPA standards for air pollution that are informed by public health research are based on the entire adult population, and probably underestimate the threshold at which air pollution levels become problematic or adverse to the health of older adults. And my target audience was the EPA Scientific Advisory Board that reviews the evidence, but also gerontologists and people who work on aging populations, because I wanted more representation of aging researchers on the Scientific Advisory Board to really push the idea that they should focus on different parts of the age range to understand age-based vulnerability to the impact of air pollution on health. Because I just wanted to see a little more representation on the Scientific Advisory Board, because it primarily focused on children or younger adults.
Yeah, that's great. So older adults are affected by air pollution too. Let's make sure that standards actually capture the effects it has on older adults. It's great. Anybody else before we wrap up and get final thoughts or questions? Okay, I'm not going to call out people like I would in class, so so we can stop it there. I did provide a slide here with just some additional resources in case anybody's interested in sort of best practices for writing compelling op-eds. The Scholar Strategies Network has some. The op-ed project also has some writing tips. And there are a couple of other resources here that might be valuable to you. And so, I just want to open it up for any additional questions or feedback from the audience, experiences you've had, advice you have. Stop there.
Shannon, thank you so much. I mean, this presentation was really amazing, super comprehensive. You really are the guru of getting work in the hands of non-policy or non-academic audiences and doing it in a really, really compelling way. I mean, obviously I'm monitoring comments in the chat today, and, several folks had, raised the issue that, maybe we should be writing our own academic papers in a different way and kind of breaking from the tradition of them, being long and dense, and, recognizing that, part of writing academic papers is to sell our ideas, and, the way that we write might be getting in the way of that. So I really appreciate your tried and true strategies that you shared with us today. Does anybody have any? Oh, yes, they do. I'm seeing hands raised. So let's turn it over to some questions. I see Scott Landis, you have your hand raised.
And will you speak briefly about the challenge, whether academic or emotional, to seeing your work misrepresented in the press, and what you do, what you can and can't do about that? I mean, you've talked to me about that, but I just wanted if you'd share your wisdom on that.
This happened with the Deaths of Despair and Support for Trump brief, which was ecological, right? It was county level analysis, and Bill Maher, I think it was Bill Maher, ran a story about it, and the headline of his story was drug addicts voted for Trump. It's like totally not what that brief was about. So, I mean, I don't know. In cases where I've been misquoted by a reporter, I'll email them and say, this is inappropriate. You misquoted me. That's not what I said. There are some cases where you can't do anything about it. You kind of just have to live with it, and understand that if you're going to engage in this kind of work, that can happen. And you need to decide whether you're kind of willing to live with that or not. if it's a reporter who does it, you don't ever have to work with them again, right? Just, put them on your blacklist and say they're done. But I happen to benefit from a thick skin, so it doesn't bother me as much as it might bother some people, but I can see how it might make some people feel really terrible. Do you have other advice, Scott? Has this happened to you?
One of our COVID papers on people with intellectual and developmental disability, we had a NPR reporter who did a great job on air, but his online article headline was "People with Autism at Higher Risk from COVID-19." And we didn't have people with autism in our study.
Oh.
And it hit the autism social networks and exploded. And they're like, oh my God, I'm going to die. Look what this paper says. And I went back to the reporter and he said, well, it's too late. It's out there. He's a good reporter, but he said, I can't do anything now. And at first I did a little bit of work myself on the social network to say, no, it's not what we said, and to point people to the paper and give an explanation. But after a while, I was like, I can't monitor this. It's unfortunate, but so that's just my example.
It's kind of
the word got out.
It's kind of out of your hands. Like Ken Johnson does a lot of research on natural decrease and the fact that sort of like white population decline is happening in a lot of areas. And that stuff gets picked up on like Breitbart and, white nationalist groups as like a scare tactic. It's certainly not his intent for doing that kind of research, but we can't really control what happens with our research after it's out there, unfortunately. Erin?
So I think my question is maybe a little bit more specific to grad students. I feel like I might be the only one in here, but I'm kind of thinking about like that, like academic urgency to like get things out in the world and do things, right? Which like doing this kind of work is super, like I've written 4 briefs, right? And they were super fun and I loved them and I would do a dozen of them if I could. But also I think the struggle for me that maybe you would have some advice about is how you balance not taking up all your ideas with research briefs and being able to also get them published in like academic spaces, because like as much as it sucks, that is what matters, right? Like I want a CV on the job market that is full of both, and I can't do both if I like eat up all of my ideas and my time and energy with briefs. So I don't know, just your thoughts on like maybe how you would balance that or ways to kind of like work around it so that you can make the most of both spaces.
Yes, great question. I have two answers. So one is that, you write the academic paper and then immediately flip it to a brief, right? So any paper that you write for a journal, be thinking about, as soon as you got that submitted, be thinking about how you can turn that into a brief. So once it's accepted in the journal, you can publish it right away. You double dip. The other is that just because you write a brief doesn't mean you can't then write an academic paper. Briefs are very simple, right? The purpose is it's one big takeaway. So you can still take that same topic, the same research question that guided your brief, and then write a peer-reviewed journal article from that topic. Okay, so it can go both ways. And you don't need to be worried about a publisher not accepting a paper because it's been a brief, because it's very different, right? The style is different, the language is different, the figures are different, everything's different. So the idea that just because it's a brief means you can't send it to a journal is that's not true. You can have both worlds. Bob?
My question is related, so thanks, Erin, for asking that. I'd say the last 10 to 15 years, I've had graduate students in particular, that's almost all they wanted to do was write blogs and briefs and stuff like this. And it's been a real fight to encourage them to write academic articles and dissertations instead of blogs and briefs and so forth. So, we know that those are the tickets that eventually allow folks to write briefs and blogs and so on. So that was going to be my question. What advice do you give your own students about this kind of tension of what I think of as like quick rewards and potential impact versus making it in the field and not being allowed to do this over the long haul?
Excellent question. Yeah, I mean, I tell them exactly what you tell them, which is that in order to have the opportunity to be able to do this in a sanctioned setting like a university, you have to get a job. And the way that you get a job is by finishing your dissertation and by writing peer-reviewed journal articles that will make you competitive on the market. And you can do both, right? Like write the article first and then write the brief. The nice thing about the brief is that's going to get you the other type of attention that's good for your CV. It's going to get you the media attention. It's going to get you the attention from policymakers. So get your name out there, but it has to be based on some kind of empirical evidence. And if you're going to go through the time of that empirical evidence building, you might as well write a peer-reviewed published article. So you can't just do public dissemination. You have to do the academic writing too. And that can be fun, especially if we write in simpler language, which, by the way, Jennifer Karras-Montes is really good at this. Her peer-reviewed journal articles are like an exercise in writing clearly and in a really compelling way. And Bob too. I've used both of your papers in my classes this semester to show how to write good academic articles that aren't overly complicated and difficult to understand.
Well, thank you, Shannon. I always say that it's because I have an 8th grade vocabulary, and I'm not entirely joking about that. So I can't.
No, it's
like,
hard. It's
complicate
hard to
things.
write this way. It's more difficult to write clear and simple than it is to write, sort of complicated. We have to think through the sentence structure and the words. So I commend you both.
Yeah, thanks. I don't know those big words either.
Well, this was, Kathy has a comment. I'd encourage some restraint. Publishing a brief for every paper may water down the impact of really important findings. Yeah, I think it's a good point. It's like many things in our world, it's a balancing act. And trying to maximize your impact in the scholarly arena as well as the non-academic piece is, it can be challenging for sure. Well, Shannon, thank you so much. We're almost out of time. So this was incredibly helpful. Now I want to go write a brief instead of all the other things that I have to do this afternoon.
Well, thank you all. And thank you for those of you who shared. Appreciated hearing about your experiences and your advice. And again, for those of you who don't have a venue or you're just getting started with this sort of stuff, get in touch with me and maybe we can get you published in the Learner Center Pop Health Research Brief Series.
Thank you. And so I just want to mention one more thing. So Kathy put in a question about an email list for future presentations. I'm going to put this in the chat box, although Kathy Forrest, are you on the call? Can you put is it just aging network at syr.edu?
Oh, boy, I'd have to look this up. Are you talking about like our email?
The email that would come
Oh,
to
yes,
you.
aging network at syr.edu.
So if you want to be, if you're not already on the distribution list for our presentations, you can send an email there with your contact information and Kathy Forrest will get you on the list. Well, thanks everyone. Have a wonderful weekend and we will see many of you in the spring.
Thank you.
Happy holidays,
Thanks so much, Shannon.
Thanks, Shannon.
Bye.
Bye.